Hi, and welcome to another AOGP Outside of the Church podcast, Scientology Outside of the Church podcast from the Advanced Order of the Great Plains. I'm here with Quenton Stroud, and we're going to talk about one of the hottest topics on the internet about Scientology. Now, again, I want to note we're independent Scientologists. Okay, we're not part of the church, but this subject applies to everyone and everything, whether you're in the church, you're outside of the church. And we're going to just go ahead and jump into the deep end of the pool. It's a 12-foot pool, maybe 15-foot pool. It's a dive pool. And we're going to see where this takes us. I think this will be one of our more listened to podcasts if people listen to the end. So listen to the end to get all of the information. So here we go. Disconnection in Scientology. What is disconnection in Scientology?
Well, I'll tell you this. When disconnection was around, my understanding around it was that obviously the church was rather new, fairly new, and a lot of things were unable to be handled uh, because of just not knowing exactly how to go about it, not having all the policies in place, not having everything, whatever.
Mhm.
So the disconnection policy, when it was first instituted back in like 1965 or something like that, 15 years or less than 15 years or just over 10 years of the organization being founded, it was like, yeah, we need to disconnect from certain people that are antagonistic towards what's what's being built here.
Mhm.
Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, well, it was, I mean, generally it was people who were antagonistic to the subject of Scientology, and they were making the people that were doing Scientology and were reaching for higher heights in life and trying to do better. That there were people who were saying, you can't, uh, I don't want you doing Scientology because, well, I don't like it and I think it's bad. And I mean, it's
That
that's
was it.
that was it. And there's a brief anecdote. Buddy Rich, the incredibly well known and probably one of the best drummers ever in the history of man. Buddy Rich, his daughter was on course at Celebrity Center International in Hollywood. And when Buddy found out that his daughter was on course, Buddy drove down to the castle down there, and he stormed into Celebrity Center International, went upstairs, grabbed his daughter, and dragged her out. Dragged her off of course. People, trying to get her away from him and everything, and he succeeded to pull his daughter off course, and she was never seen again in there. I don't remember what year this is, but it was probably in the 80s. And so that's how bad it can get. Where was free will in all of that?
Right.
Where was
For
self-determinism in all of that?
for the daughter, for the one who wanted
Yeah,
to
right. Right.
take a course. Yeah.
She was obviously there. I mean, I can't say obviously, but was apparently there because she had an interest. She wanted to learn more about it, and was doing something about it. And her dad came in and forcefully took her out of the course room. That's the best example, and it's the most extreme example I've ever heard. I know for certainty that there are others, but that demonstrates how bad that sort of thing can be. Now, I need to say this, given the state of the church now and how controlling they are, and that your self-determinism, there is self-determinism does not exist in the church unless you play by their rules. When's the last time you ever heard of the church ever applying an ethics condition to something that they did to a public? It doesn't happen. Ever, because they feel they have the moral high ground. It's just never happened. And when I tell people that, they laugh and they laugh and they laugh. But the conditions work both ways. And this is something that people need to understand, that, the Catholic Church, Jehovah's Witnesses, Scientology, Independent Scientology, everybody is in some sort of a condition, and if they do something wrong to somebody, they should make it right. And LRH has policies for that. The service PL is a prime example. Is you don't let policy get in the way of getting something done, but you don't use that as a justification for what it is that you're trying to do either, and just throw policy out the window. Policy is there as usually because something was done wrong, and then policy was written to prevent it from happening again. But it is very important to make a note that everybody is in a condition, and if somebody screws up, they need to fix it. And when you're dealing with oppressive parents, you're dealing with an oppressive spouse, suppressive spouse, or everybody has suppressive tendencies. Everybody. There's no Thetan on this planet that doesn't have a little outflowing suppression on something to other people. And that's what auditing handles. Now, that doesn't mean that they're suppressive, because it's only 2.5% per LRH of the society. But you need to know this, and that, like he says, there isn't any problem with the tech if you're having a problem with it. It's the personalities involved. The problem becomes where it becomes an overabundance of suppression. If you're doing something in Scientology, if you're gay, you're trans, whatever. This is where the line gets crossed. I'm not going to use a non-Scientology expression. Boundaries. Okay. And this is why this idea exists. And we're gonna deconstruct this here in the next hour. This is why this idea exists.
Yeah, and it's interesting because even as you were mentioning some of the different ways that people deal with um, this policy, deal with the idea of this policy, the idea of disconnection, the idea that we one is being asked to, or in some cases they say forced to disconnect. I think it's interesting because back then, I'm gonna say in 1965 or whatever, people were very different. You try something in 2023, you try some things in 2023, you might get a whole different response. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think that the whatever, I don't know what to call it, the social veneer, or maybe the respect
that's what I was
level, or
going to
maybe
say.
whatever it was in 1965 that allowed people to treat women a certain way,
Yeah.
that allowed people to make certain statements or do certain things to their family or their children. That stuff doesn't even exist anymore. And so you put your hands on me in a course room, we ain't coming out that course. One of us ain't coming out the course room. You understand what I'm saying? It's just a different situation. Right. So I just think that people are different now. So I think we need to really discuss disconnection from the terms of also context. Is that okay? Yeah. Can we also say that? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and there's a context to it, and I want to make a point here, and this is something that I've learned recently about the whole thing about boundaries. Somebody goes into the church, and we've had several people mention this to us at AOGP that were in the church, where the first time they went into a corporate Scientology organization and everything, they were asking them for their credit card numbers and their bank account, and wanted to see what they had in their bank account. I'm sorry, that's a boundary you will not cross. It is none of your business. And this is something that's happened in Scientology since Miscavige took over, is boundary crossing after boundary crossing after boundary crossing and after boundary crossing. And what it tells me is there is no respect for the parishioners. And the church replies with, do you have a withhold? Do you, sir, have a withhold? Why do you need this information? So at that point, at that point, I mean, we have a lot of people that have gone into the church for 2 weeks. They love the material and everything, and then everything went to hell in a handbasket because they crossed these boundaries. And this is why, and this is the opposite flow. Why would you disconnect from the corporate church of Scientology? it's an interesting concept, because
Why disconnection? Yeah.
why disconnection? Why? Because they're asking me to do this, 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 and this. They're making me feel uncomfortable. They're getting up in my business, and it's none of their business. And they will
So
not
it's
and will not stop. It's the same thing that they decry about with other people. Go ahead.
No, it's just interesting you say that, because I never thought about that particular thing as a boundary crossing. For me, it's interesting because that happened to me, right? And
Mhm.
and my Reg loved him, cool person or whatever, just like
Mhm.
personally. But he literally said that. And my 2D at the time was like, whoa, like, why are you asking me a question? And I was like, what's the problem? Like, I know how much money I got in my account. Like, let me show you. Let me pull up and I put it right up on my phone. That don't mean you get none of it. Just because I can show you what I got, that don't mean you get none of it.
Well, right, right.
I guess my question is that all of this, especially even as we talk about our family members, and we talk about even the organization, the corporate church or whatever, all this stuff that we're talking about, it really goes back to who are you as a being?
That's right.
And what can you handle? What can you experience? And if that is something, if that level of confronting, that level of ability is high, there's a lot in this world that you can survive and you can get through and you can handle and you can thrive even through,
Mhm.
if you're able to do so, right?
Mhm.
And so again, it's not to any way shame or put any onus on any victims that have been really, really hurt from such things,
Yeah.
but it is to say, how do we as individuals, as Thetans, get to a place where anybody coming at me, okay, I see what you're doing.
Mhm.
I got you.
Mhm.
And so literally that happened to me when he asked for my account. I said, okay, yeah, let me show you. Boom. And he was like, oh, okay, yeah, you good. I said, yeah, I'm good. That don't mean you get none of it. That's
Mhm.
exactly what I said.
Right. Well, and different personalities, uh they have a hard time saying no. And this comes down to, like we were talking about in the before we started the podcast, in the research portion of it, was it all comes back to the code of honor. It all comes back to the code of
Yes.
honor. And this is the problem that people have is, well, for lack of a better way to put it, you know what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. Whether you've read the code of honor or not, you have to protect yourself. If you're not protecting yourself, you're committing overts against yourself. If you're giving the church access to your credit cards and they have your credit card number on file, there's thousands of stories of the church charging people's credit cards for books and stuff that they didn't get permission for, services.
And then nobody, oh, never mind. Let me stop. Right. Cause if that ever happened to me, boy, I go in there and take every book I could. I'd be like,
Yeah. Yeah, well,
I'm
I mean,
just talking.
that's about that. Those are boundary crossings, and one of the things that I learned, it got me to not have boundaries with people, being on staff, being a reg, being an OES, that type of a thing. And you've got to do something about this. You're on staff. What about the GI? How are we going to eat this week? And all this stuff. So
Yeah, yeah.
no,
I can
no, no, no,
understand
no,
that.
no, 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 no. That's
Right.
if you give services the way they're supposed to be given, you don't have to do that.
You don't have to worry about that.
You
Yeah.
don't have to worry
It's
about
funny. My mama used to always say, she would say, she say, the devil know who not to mess with. Because I guess some people they would do that too. The devil know who not to mess with.
it. Yeah.
Don't mess with me.
Right.
It'll be a
and
whole
and, and
different
that,
shit
that that
show.
yeah, because there's some ethics present for the person, and this comes back to the point. If there's somebody you need to disconnect from, you need to disconnect from those people. And if you put your foot down and say, look, I am not going to take any of your bullshit. You're not going to tell me what to do. You're not going to tell me how to do it. And this is what we were talking about prior to the podcast. And I think this is an important point to make, especially when it comes to family members. Uh, I wanted to mention there is such a thing called Stockholm Syndrome. And then we'll get back to
Mhm.
this other topic that I'll put the title in a second. Stockholm Syndrome is where you start protecting your suppressor, because you're so weak and you're so beat down on the whole thing. There's no way that they could be wrong. A lot of this is what happens in the church, especially to Sea Org members. They don't know what they don't know, that and they get it crossed with what their goals are, and that they can't be wrong on their goals, so they could never ever make a mistake in the decision that they should have been in the Sea Org, and David Miscavige is right, so on and so forth.
Mhm. I would say this, that when you say Stockholm syndrome, that really rang true, because with Stockholm syndrome, it really does kind of operate in stages. And it comes about when a person has been under the care, and I'll use that word for this conversation, has been under the care of certain people, and those certain people make them feel like they're being cared for. But what they're really doing is they're keeping them, if that makes sense. So there's a difference being cared for and keeping them, keeping you close, keeping you in communication, keeping you for whatever reason, right? The person will start to develop a positive feeling for their captors, for the person who, or the people who are keeping them in this situation. And then from there, there's this idea that if anybody refuses, if they refuse to go to the police, or if they refuse to tell another authority, or if they refuse to talk about it, this is good. If they refuse to talk about their captivity, if they refuse to talk about the issues in their family, if they refuse to talk about what mama did or what daddy did, that's actually a part of Stockholm syndrome. The refusal to talk about what's been done to one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And talking about it actually breaks kind of the hold that the captor has over the individual. So
Right.
if they're refusing to talk about what was done to them, right? Some in the South, there's this whole thing: you don't let everybody up in your business. What happens in our house, stay in my house. Don't be going telling everybody my business, like that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, you just beat me to the ground, you know what I'm saying, or whatever, and I can't go and tell nobody about your business because it's grown folk business or whatever. So it's a whole thing. And I like how you said it earlier. If you know that there are some people you need to disconnect from, if the inkling comes up, if the thought comes up,
Mm-hmm.
you need to disconnect from them,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, you
And
got to be honest with yourself.
that's not a policy. It's just a good practice.
Yeah, yeah, and it's in that situation when you're talking to somebody and they don't want to talk to you. If you can get your foot in the door and you go, do you hear what you're saying? Do you hear yourself? Because you're so convinced that the situation is what the situation is.
Right.
This is the same thing in a family situation where they're going to say that what I just said to you, and you can say that to them, and you get to a point to where you go, I'm not getting through to these people.
Yeah.
There's no getting through to them because their
And
reality
their
is
and
so
their
different
behavior
than
is not
mine.
changing.
Yeah, their
Right.
behavior is not changing, and there might be countless conversations, arguments, both, more arguments probably than anything else. And this comes down to, like we mentioned before the podcast, the third party law. For any argument to exist, there's a hidden third party.
Right.
And so that makes it a lot more complicated. And to do a third party investigation to sort the whole thing out and everything would be the thing to do, and to educate the parents or the significant other about. And this isn't just about doing Scientology. I want to make
Yes.
that point clear. It doesn't have a damn thing to do with just Scientology. This applies whether you're a Scientologist or not. If you've got
This
a
applies at jobs.
yeah,
It applies in relationships,
yep,
romantic relationships.
yep,
It applies in churches or organizations such as Scientology, corporate church of Scientology. It applies in that kind of situation. If somebody's doing you wrong, there's a handle for that or whatever. It applies across the board, and it also applies. And I'm gonna say it with your mama and daddy in them.
mm-hmm,
It
yeah,
applies.
yeah,
Because there's certain things I'm going to finish this flow about the steps of, or the stages of Stockholm syndrome, because the last stage is where the hostage or the person that's the victim is starting to empathize with.
mm-hmm,
the captor
That's
and
right.
starting to no longer perceive them as a threat. And so when you get people say, well, that's my mama, that's my daddy,
Mm-hmm.
that's my family. Well, that can still be a threat. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so you've identified with them so tightly, and that's
Mm-hmm.
the same thing with the organization. You've
Yep.
identified with it so tightly that you no longer see it as a threat.
Mm-hmm.
That's the fourth stage of Stockholm Syndrome. It's the
Mm-hmm.
worst
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
because it truly is a trap. Okay,
yeah, you absolutely go into agreement with it.
yeah,
To you, the fruits of observation are now 100% shut off, and there's that expression, the to the Jonestown massacre. Did you drink the Kool-Aid?
yep,
Did you not? If you look
yeah,
back on that story, there were a lot of people who didn't drink the Kool-Aid. They were like, this is not my thing, and this is wrong, type of a deal.
yeah,
And you get down to that sort of a thing. Well, if I drink the Kool-Aid, I'm going to die. That's a big decision. Do I trust these people? And what's going to happen afterwards? That type of thing. And that's an extreme situation. But even if you're not involved in the church, if you've got somebody that is being abusive to you, is being toxic to you, it still applies. You cannot live happily if your ethics are out. If you're
right.
unhappy, and we've said this before in the podcast, if you're unhappy, your ethics are out. And you've got to do something about that situation. Who is causing you to be unhappy? Is it you? That's the first thing you should ask yourself. Is it me?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to take a good hard look at that and separate these things out. Is it something that I'm doing? And if you've gotten that out of the way and your code of honor is in and you've got your quote unquote ethics in, then it is somebody else that is pushing your buttons and making you sick, making you unhappy, making
Yep.
you feel squashed. That's why we call it a potential trouble source. Things start to happen to you because you are in a suppressive situation. Now, of course, in the podcast that we've done before, we've mentioned where LRH says you cannot be a potential trouble source if you haven't committed an overt against someone who is suppressing you. So that comes back
Mm-hmm.
to keep your ethics in and keep your nose clean. You can't be suppressed. You don't need to
Right,
disconnect. So roll that
right.
back up and go, okay, what can I be responsible for? Okay. So
Wow, that's so
it
good.
if you're getting suppressed by the church, think about that for a second. If you're going
Wow,
the
that's so good.
if you're going the adverse effect of what the church is doing, what did you do to the church that you wouldn't want done to you?
So let me comment on what you just said, because that's a very powerful like trifecta of wisdom
Mm-hmm.
that you just gave, right? You
Mm-hmm.
said about the third party law,
Mm-hmm.
right? You mentioned the code of honor,
Mm-hmm.
and you mentioned ethics, which includes a responsibility drill, like doing a responsibility drill, right?
Yeah.
And that trifecta right there can save your life. I'm telling you now. I'm telling you what I know, not what I read out of a book. Okay.
Wear that as a badge of courage, and keep that in on your phone and in your notepad, and look at that every damn day of your life.
The trifecta. I'm telling you, that will save your life. Code of honor, responsibility drills, taking responsibility, what could you take responsibility for,
Mm-hmm.
and what was the other one? Third party law, knowing the third party law and understanding like when some upsets happen, what's going on, who is what, who did
Mm-hmm.
what, da da da,
Mm-hmm.
and and that applies across the board. I had to have this conversation with my 2D, and I was like, "Who are you talking to?" I was just talking to my sister. And oh, okay, okay. I got it.
Right.
You know,
Right. Who has your ear, and what are you going into agreement with? And see, this is a very interesting point. I got to say something about this. Okay, because there's a tapestry here with the people that you listen to. And this tapestry it's like a web, it's like a net. When you really have to back this up. It comes down to choosing your people. If you get involved with the Church of Scientology, the corporate Church of Scientology, and you get involved with these people, all right, the first thing you need to do is you need to look at what is the tone level of these people. Because at the end of the day, all of your woes in life, all of your unhappiness, all of your happiness comes from the company you keep and the people you choose in your inner circle, your satanic circle of trust type of thing. And if you make a mistake and you're trusting people you shouldn't be trusting because they're low on the tone scale, how they deal with communication, what they say, are they covertly hostile, that type of thing. This is where the problems start. And you need to look at that. And that's where this whole thing starts out. Who are you dealing with? Now you can't you live on an island with your volleyball Wilson. That's different. And you talk to Wilson and you're by yourself. No, that's not going to work.
Right.
So you need to get educated on this stuff in order to be able to spot this. That's what the book Science of Survival is for. That's why the PTSSP course, the ups and downs course are important. And that's why people are reaching for this. And it's almost a bit of a bait and switch in the corporate church of Scientology because the tech is viable. It indicates to people, they're like, yeah, this is really good stuff. Yeah, you're getting it straight from LRH's mouth for the most part. A lot of it has been changed and has been spun in order for them to keep the copyright. So you got to be careful of that. But you have to be able to differentiate on who you can trust and who you cannot trust. You should trust people until they give you a reason not to. And that's when you need to apply a condition, look at the chart of human evaluation, spot them on the tone scale, and then make your decisions. Because that the code of honor is the next thing. And you need to keep your nose clean and not commit overs against these people, because the moment you do, they own you. And
Yeah.
you're the one that gave them the keys to the castle and the portcullis and crossing the moat and everything like that. And that's what boundaries are for, is, you shall not pass and you shall not have information I don't want you to have, and don't give anybody information that they don't need. The huge
Right.
rule of thumb right there. So it's important to understand that the company you keep is what's going to make you happy or make you unhappy. You could go with independent Scientology in the field. We're a kinder, gentler Scientology. We don't ask you questions that aren't our purview. I'm not going to ask you. We're not going to tell you to disconnect from anybody, because that's your choice. That's free will, and you cannot circumvent somebody's free will and keep them self-determined.
Right.
So that brings us to
Well, can I ask a question though?
yeah, go ahead.
So so what does what does disconnection really mean? Right? Because when I came from a background, I was Jehovah's Witness, I'll just say it, background Jehovah's Witness. And in the witness movement, there is this concept called disfellowshipping,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you disfellowship, like we're not fellowshipping with you anymore. And basically, whether it be your mama, grandmama, whoever, daddy, like whoever it is, they cannot fellowship with you. Does that mean they don't see you? If they see you in the street, they'll step over you? No. It just means that we're not fellowshipping with one another. We're not
Mm-hmm.
hanging out. We're not going to the movies. We're not going on family vacations like that, whatever, whatever. Now, if
Mm-hmm.
I see you at the family reunion, of course I'll hug you and, keep it on push, but it's like a fair rose, fair weather kind of relationship.
Right.
There's is that different in Scientology when it comes to disconnection, or is it like, no, you become an actual public enemy number one
Well,
when it comes to your
the
family?
concept behind disconnection is it's a form of protection, either for the church, the corporate church of Scientology, or the individual themselves. If you're
Mhm.
in an abusive relationship, and your husband or wife or significant other is abusing you, you're going to stick around.
People do.
People do. Okay, but you're violating your own code of honor if you do. And if you can't disconnect, God help you.
Hmm.
History is littered with people who couldn't disconnect.
Right.
Okay, because they're being suppressed. That's
Right.
that's what disconnection is for. Is if the relationship has become so, and I hate to use the catchword, but it fits. If it's
Toxic.
become so toxic that you can't be around anymore, you've got to leave. You've got to
Yeah.
disconnect that communication, because what's happening is you're getting restimulated. The reactive mind is getting restimulated, and then you're going to have
Over and over again.
engram after engram after engram, lock after lock after lock, secondary after secondary after secondary. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
throughout history, through, the last week on this planet, millions upon millions of people are in relationships where they do not meet tone level wise. If your tone level is one stage, emotional tone level in ARC, same thing, is one stage, and the person that you're with is another, the higher tone has to selectively give. We've mentioned this before, and it bears
Yes.
repeating. When your tone levels are so different, you're basically diametrically opposed to each other, and
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be like putting together two chemicals that cause an explosion, and you're just going to keep putting those chemicals together until there's so many explosions you can't see straight, you can't make proper decisions. You have vested interest, you have sensation if it's a relationship with sex, and then you just go down the chute. You don't want it to
Mm-hmm.
get that far. That's why we go back to knowing the tone scale and picking people who have a similar tone level.
Thank you. Well, now it's interesting you say that because I've always picked people who are at a different tone level slash calm lag than me.
Mm-hmm.
And I would look at the calm lag as a good indicator. Because most of the people I would connect with or whatever were integral. They, didn't tell bold lies and da da da.
Mm-hmm.
It was fine, but it was just the calm lag thing was extremely low. Um, I'm sorry, high. Calm lag was extremely high.
Mm-hmm.
And um, I now see the vast difference in having a 2D relationship with somebody who has a similar calm lag. It that yeah, that doesn't always mean that it's good and we everything is wonderful. No, it's just that we communicate at a certain level. We communicate in a certain way that it feels so A to B. Like even when we're arguing, even when stuff is going crazy, it feels so A to B. I'm saying this for a reason because when it comes to understanding this whole idea of disconnection, when it comes to understanding the whole idea of disconnection, you get to a place where you ask yourself the question, is it worth it? That's my biggest question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it worth it to stay connected to you?
Mm-hmm.
Is it worth it to stay in this relationship? Is it worth it to stay in this organization, in this situation? Is it worth it to stay there? And what people usually do is they make emotional decisions for practical questions,
That's right.
right?
That's
They
right.
make emotional decisions when it's a really a practical question. Is it worth it? Is a
Mm-hmm.
practical question,
Mm-hmm.
right? Uh, 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 because when it comes to your happiness, when it comes to your health, when it comes to your longevity, when it comes to your safety, when it comes to your financial safety or financial security, when it comes to some of these things, those are all very practical things to look at objectively, or one should look at objectively, in my opinion. Like look at objectively, and yet we make an emotional decision about a practical question. And so when I asked the question, so let me give you a little brief story and I'll let you talk. When we talk about I grew up Jehovah's Witness and stuff like that, and when it came out that I did not agree with and or live by certain policies within the witness movement,
Mm-hmm.
of course it became a big inquiry. You guys have what's called the ethics handling or ethics officer, whatever. In the witness movement, they have the board of elders. So you
Mm-hmm.
literally have to sit before a board of elders, and the board of elders has to hear your confession or if whatever happened. Tell us what happened. Tell us what went down. Tell us what's going on. Tell us, how you're living. And you basically go through like a confessional kind of thing. And then it comes out what the issue is. They'll apply some tech or Bible to it, right? They'll use
Mm-hmm.
Bible to, well, this is what the Bible says, this is what the Bible says, this is what the Bible says, whatever. And then at the end of it, they'll ask you, do you repent? Are you ready to turn your life around? Are you ready to, get back in alignment with what it says?
Mm-hmm.
Well, on certain things, I couldn't agree to that. I just
Mm-hmm.
couldn't make that
It wasn't
that
true
you
for
know that
you.
that it wasn't true for me, right? It didn't work for me. And so in saying all that, I had to deal with the consequences or the shift that needed to take place in our relationship, my relationship with the organization,
Mm-hmm.
and my relationship with those within the organization.
Right. A doubt condition.
And yeah, and I had to ask myself the question, how do I really, who am I really, who are my real friends? Who really supports me? What am I really about? What is this whole thing? And I had to go through all of this. Now, I didn't have the doubt condition back at, when I was
Right.
19,
Right.
but I had what I knew.
Mm-hmm.
I was a past life Scientologist, so I had what I knew, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what I knew didn't ring true for me. And I was like, I just can't agree to that. And I was able to stand in my truth. Hear me, people. When it comes to that question of why disconnection, the only question that really matters to you is, am I able to stand in my truth?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're able to stand in your truth, on that, your whole integrity hangs.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes then your stable datum. That becomes your truth. And if you stand on that rock, you have nothing to worry about when it comes to whatever people gotta say. What you gonna say?
Right.
Okay, like,
Yeah. Well,
okay, I'm sorry.
it's that can you be honest with yourself? And there's a policy for the doubt condition called hang up at doubt. And it says if you can't get out of doubt, you either have one of two things going on. You've got false data that you're operating off of in the situation, and you need to look and find out what the false data is, and that comes down to be honest with yourself and look at the facts and be logical, like you were saying earlier. And the other one is that you are a potential trouble source, and you have to handle that potential trouble source situation in order to get out of doubt. Who is suppressing you? What's keeping you down? Well, I believe what they say. That they're my mother, and it's family, and family is the bonds, and okay, I get that. But the thing is you are a spiritual being. You don't always choose, not always. At the end of the day, you can say, well, who was there and who was communicating? I picked that body up. She's my mama. He's my daddy. I made that decision. I mean, in the end, that's the gruesome truth of it more often than it isn't. But that doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to stay the same the older you get. People change.
Right.
They commit overts. They individuate. They become critical. They become toxic.
Mm-hmm. Shit happens.
Shit happens. So the people that you chose might not be the same people when they get older, and people change when they get older. Sometimes they get a lot nicer, and sometimes they get an awful lot meaner.
Well, and it goes for again, for the individual that's having to go through this, right? The one who's having to deal with this disconnection or having to deal with this decision. You know, there's an adage that said, when I was a babe, I used to think as a babe, to act as a babe, to do things as a babe. But now that I am a man or a matured person, I put away childish things. And that doesn't mean you forget the relationship that you develop with your family as a child. That doesn't mean that you forget all the wonderful moments that you shared or whatever. But I put away childish things in the sense that I no longer identify under that banner. I was having a conversation with a client of mine, and she's 20 years old, and her parents, she wants to move out and she wants to get her own place and do her own thing. She's working 2 jobs. She can totally sustain herself financially. She's doing very well for herself, but her parents don't want her to individuate like that. And they're kind of antagonistic about it, almost to the point of like locking her in her room at times, like, whatever. And she's 20 years old. And it got so bad, like they had to call me on like a family group call or whatever. And I was like, at some point, you're no longer the parent and you're now the mother or the father.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a difference. There's a difference in being a parent to somebody, which means you're raising them, you're rearing them, you're growing them up, you're doing whatever. But when that person is grown, you're not my mother, but you're not my parent anymore. if
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? And so I'm only throwing this out there only because my situation dealt with my parents, but I'm throwing this out there to say you get to a place in your own maturity, whether that be spiritual maturity, whether that be maturity in your own knowingness as a being, or in your family, you get to a place where your maturity takes over. I now put away childish things and I'm able to stand on my own two big spiritual feet.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
That's
able to make
right.
decisions for myself. Whoever I want to talk to, let me talk to them. Whoever I want to deal with, let me deal with them. And whatever consequences that come along with that,
Mm-hmm.
right? I
Mm-hmm.
got it.
Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
and the Hubbard's materials on responsibility, knowingness, responsibility, control, and all of that we talked about in the past podcast, KRC and ARC. You have to learn about some of these tools in order to get a proper perspective on them. And a lot of the people that decry disconnection, I'm just going to be honest and I'm just going to put it out there. I'm not going to mince any words. I'll be blunt. They have misunderstood words, or they don't know the material at all. They don't want to know the material. So,
Hmm.
of course, I mean, it's on Reddit all the time and all that stuff where, I mean, these knowing the material like I know them as an auditor and a case supervisor, an OT8, a class 8, class 9 auditor CS. I see this stuff, see these people say things, and it's that hang up at doubt. They have false data. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know anything about the subject. They don't understand this stuff, and they've bought into a bunch of mores, morals, rules, regulations, laws, opinion more than anything else. Opinion and natter, just critical comments about things that they've taken and made fact. And it's just plain wrong. And if you don't have the appropriate data and you don't give yourself a chance to really understand it, clear up your misunderstandings, your misunderstood words, use it in your life, anybody anybody can take the materials that Hubbard has created and apply them to their lives, and they will see that they work. Am I going to force it down their throat? Nope.
Mm-mm.
You cannot do, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, because there's an awful lot of people out there that just want to be dramatic and they just want to dramatize whatever it is. And that's
Yeah.
just their mode of operation, because that's their tone level, and that's how they operate. They're being influenced by valences of other people, that they do this. Now I'm supposed to say this. Now I'm supposed to do that. And they're acting like somebody else because to them it's survival. Listen to our podcast on valences to get more information on that in season 5. This
Hmm.
is why these things happen, is because they're not being themselves. They're not using a code of honor to who they really are, and they have absolutely no clue who they really are. Therefore, they cannot look at other people and see what's going on there that is influencing them.
Yeah. And I love how you said they either have misunderstood words or they have not really taken a moment to really dive into the tech. Because one thing I like about the body of work that LRH created was that it all kind of feeds on each other. Like it all builds upon each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the sense of when he first started his research back in the 1950s to as time went on, as the organization was built, there's a whole bunch of other problems and things that one had to deal with once you start a whole church or organization around this, right? And then from there, it just kind of grew and grew and grew. So some of the things that came down the track, like there had to be certain things in place. I think about a baby, and this is a conversation I actually had with somebody who was, I wouldn't say antagonistic in Scientology, but had an issue with this particular concept about disconnection. And I said, you got to understand, when the church was first founded, it was a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And as it grows up, what do you do with the baby? You put a baby in a playpen. You put a baby within certain confounds. You put a baby within certain things, and the baby has to get to play with soft toys or whatever, whatever. But you don't just let the baby do anything and run anywhere and have any kind of freedom, all kinds
Mm-hmm.
of freedoms. You
Right,
don't,
they'll end up dead.
because it'll end up hurting itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
It'll end up destroying itself. And so what I'm saying to that point is, as a baby, 1965 or whatever it was, as a baby, there was certain things that needed to be constructed, certain barriers that needed to be constructed for this thing to start to grow. And
Boundaries.
as it boundaries, there's that word again. And as it outgrew certain things.
Yeah.
It outgrew certain boundaries. It outgrew certain playpens. And that's why LRH said, he says, we now have the tech to handle pretty much anything that comes up. Disconnection is canceled.
Mm-hmm.
We now have the tech to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
We can now handle, let me give it to you exactly. 1968, November 15, 1968. Since we now have all types of, now handle all types of cases, disconnection as a condition is canceled. So let me be clear. I'm not saying that those who have been affected severely by such ideas as it relates to disconnection are wrong. I would say clear up any misunderstood words. Make sure you really know what you know when it comes to Scientology. If you're going to be crying about it or dealing with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to be dealing with Scientology, know what you're dealing with.
That's Get informed. Yeah.
Get totally informed about it, and then apply what you know.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is the trick. I'll tell you now. The tech was written, and it will protect you if you use it. Just like the court of law, right?
Mm-hmm.
The tech is written and it will protect you if you use it. When you go to court with just anything, right? The person who speaks the law the best wins, not the person that's always right. Okay.
That's right.
The person who knows the law the best and speaks the law the best wins. I have never been put in a situation where somebody came at me sideways or came at me wrong within the church or outside of the church, because I know what I'm talking about. I know the tech, and I will quickly go to a reference. I'll be like, hold on.
Yeah. He says, that what you know and understand, you can't be the adverse effect of.
There it is. I didn't have that one, but I know that's it.
Yeah, that summates the whole thing. Is if you're decrying disconnection in a situation which is, okay, wait for it, valid, it is a true and valid situation, and you're dealing with the toxic personalities who are making your life miserable, and you know the tech, and you don't do something about it, well, the onus is on you, because you have to be responsible, and you're not being responsible with it. And know the tech, and it will protect you. And sometimes it isn't good to be around people who are hurtful and are causing you misery and preventing you from expanding as a being. It's just a fact.
I had a very big misunderstood on PTS, or potential trouble source. It took me a long time to really understand what that was. And I'm not just talking about the misunderstood word, but I'm also talking about the lack of mass on it. Like I didn't have enough mass on it, or whatever it was, but I couldn't get it. And now I do. Now I get it. And now I'm very clear that if you, I use it's potential trouble source, but I also use potential trauma source, because you got the potential to be in some serious trauma.
Yeah.
When you deal with certain people or organizations or whatever, when you deal with certain situations and you don't get yourself out of it, you deal with it in a certain way, you got a very high potentiality to be hitting certain potential trauma source around that. And if a person really understood what PTSD really is and how bad it really can affect you and those around you, why wouldn't you want to get out of that situation?
Right. Because if you're a potential trouble source, it stands to just good, not so common sense that if you're a potential trouble source, things are going to be happening to you. And the reason why things are going to be happening to you is because you're creating things that cause problems for yourself to put your own ethics in an area. And this suppressive person or persons, or somebody that reminds you of an earlier suppressive person or persons, is causing this. That is why you're a potential trouble source. You are a liability. Let me repeat, you are a liability, first and foremostly, to yourself, because you will not get out of this bad situation. Your husband keeps pound in your face every night, and you stay. But I
Mhm.
love him. Hold on. Say that again.
Remember when I said that? But I love
Say that again.
him.
Or do you hear yourself? Do you hear what you're saying? And this is, I'm coming back. Finally, I'm coming back to this point. Unconditional love.
Ooh, talk
Unconditional
about it.
love. Okay. Unconditional love. And we talked about this before we started the podcast. There's love and there's unconditional love. If it's unconditional love and somebody's beating you up, they're suppressing you. And you're staying there, and it is a shade of Stockholm syndrome that you're staying there because you love them unconditionally. You need to look at that
Mm.
because you're a potential trouble source, and maybe you're not meant to be with that person. And there's nothing wrong with having unconditional love if you can get in communication with that person and you can say, you got overts on me. Now that's really difficult to front up and say to somebody, and it's a lot harder for the person to actually
But it's
say,
love.
right, right. So you
No,
it
can I
sure.
finish your flow? Because I want to jump in. Finish your flow because I want you to
Okay,
get it
so
out.
it unconditional love is a wonderful thing, and it's very difficult to find. And if it is unconditional love for you, is it unconditional love for them? And that hurts. That hurts,
Mhm.
and you have to look at it. And you were telling me that story about your mom, and you
Yeah.
just looked at it and went, okay, I got it. That's your viewpoint.
And nothing but love. Let me tell you why I know unconditional love exists, and let me tell you um how it's packaged. So I want to be very clear. You
Mm-hmm.
can have unconditional love, but unconditional love by its very nature is packaged a certain way. It doesn't mean that love doesn't have boundaries. It doesn't mean that love doesn't have limits. Unconditional love does not mean the same thing as unlimited love.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be very clear.
Yeah, two different
Okay.
things.
Two different things. So let me say it this way, and this how this whole thing came up was my mom and my stepdad use this analogy when talking about me leaving the witness movement and the whole bit. And my stepdad said that we love you,
Mm-hmm.
and our love for you is like a fence. And if you go to the Grand Canyon, or if you go to a skyscraper at the top of the Eiffel Tower, or whatever, they have this fence up to keep people from falling over the edge,
Mm-hmm.
right? And our love for you is like a fence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you choose to be reckless, if you choose to climb over that fence and dangle yourself over the edge or do whatever, and you fall, that doesn't mean we don't love you. It doesn't mean we didn't love you. We had the fence there, and you just chose to climb over that fence. My rebuttal to that was, well, I hear that. I said, but my thought as a child, as your 2D, right? As your child in your 2D flow, my thought was this, that your love grows as I try to climb over the fence.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like so the higher I climb, the more I try to do certain things that are beyond the boundaries of your love, or whatever case may be. My thought is that your love would grow. Everybody's not like that. But somewhere in us as children or whatever, we sometimes think that when it comes to our family, when it comes to our parents who might be Scientologists or whatever, sometimes we think that, well, I'm your child and you're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to love me unconditionally. And that everybody doesn't have that in them. It's just
Mm-mm.
not true.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to give you two things that I found that ring true to me that might apply to love. Number one is that the first law of love is order,
Mm-hmm.
decency, rightness,
Mm-hmm.
right? The first law of love is order. So when you look at your relationships, when you look at your families, when you look at your connections, when you look at whatever, does it seem more unruly and disorderly and chaotic? Or does it seem more orderly, more A to B, more uptone?
Mm-hmm.
The first law of love is order. If it's the former, it's going to be more unruly, more chaotic, more damaging to you.
Mm-hmm.
That is not, by that codex, by that criteria, that is not love.
Mm-mm.
It's not, it's Stockholm Syndrome. It's something else. It ain't love,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not rooted in order. It's not rooted in rightness,
Yeah.
right? The second thing that I found is that love under will, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Love is the whole of the law, but love under will. In other words, your will still, your self-determinism is still paramount.
Mm-hmm.
Your self-determinism is still paramount, and love undergirds that. Love supports you in that. Love allows for you to be self-determined in that. So first of all is, the first law of love is order. And the second law is, love is the whole of the law, but love under will. Love
Mm-hmm.
under will.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you understand that your self-determinism is paramount, anybody who loves you will support you in your self-determinism.
They'll respect it.
They'll respect it.
It's a
Yeah.
boundary.
Yes. And it's clear, and it's you can feel it.
Mm-hmm.
It's energetic. It's
Mm-hmm.
palpable. It's affinity.
Mm-hmm.
You can feel it's ARC. You can feel it.
Mm-hmm. ARC
You see.
and KRC.
And so, yeah. And so all I'll say is, and I don't know where we're on time, but all I'll say is this. Actually, right at an hour. When we get to a place where we have to ask this question, should I disconnect? Or why disconnection? Why disconnection is happening? What is this all about? Where does this come from? Why is this even a thing?
Mm-hmm.
I think we've really packaged it very nicely in this conversation to really take a look at, who are you? Be honest with yourself, right? I think how you said it.
Mm-hmm.
Being honest with yourself. Find out who all is involved in the situation. Third party stuff. Find out who all is involved in this. Where is this coming from?
What
Who
are the
said
tone
that?
levels? Yeah.
Yeah, what are their tone levels? Where's all that stuff coming from? And then lastly, make sure that you have your own code of honor in. Go back over it again. Take a look at it. Make sure you have your own code of honor in, and I promise you, your life will never be the same ever again.
Well put. Well, folks, we hope you understand. If you have any questions, pop us an email. Maybe we'll do another podcast on this. We hope you've enjoyed the podcast. I know I have. And it's something that needs to be talked about and confronted always when it comes to disconnection. Make sure you share, comment, and discuss. If you see this on YouTube, we're putting all the podcasts on YouTube, Facebook. Get this to your friends, family, and neighbors, and let's get it out in the open and confront it. It's a very important subject. So for myself and Quenton, we hope you've enjoyed the podcast, and we'll see you tomorrow. We're going to be doing another podcast. Take care. Namaste. We love you. Bye-bye.
Peace.